Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton, Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is September 15th, Tuesday, September 15th, 2020. Tuesday means it's a Joan McCarter day, and just in time. And there's plenty to talk about with Joan, as usual, today. This time, I think I actually can anticipate some of the things that might be on her list. And, of course, we have the list of the things she's already written about. That we don't have to anticipate. We can just read them. Well, we don't just read them. We talk to Joan about them. You get a more in-depth look at these things and some context. And isn't that what it's really all about? I hope so, because that's what I think, and I run the show. So if we're on the same page, fantastic. And if we're not, I guess you better send me a note. All right, Daily Coast Radio is live now. Join Kagro X, says Bill, all the way from Portland, Maine. And why not join me? Why not join Bill, really, honestly? He's got plenty of room up there in Portland, I think. He's giving out all his food to squirrels. So why don't you go up there and help him with his leftover? Anyway, Daily Coast Radio is live now. Join Kagro X, me, David Waldman. Not as much room here, as he publicly whines about how little room he has, I guess. So let's find out what Bill thinks. The Green Party got kicked off the ballot in Wisconsin. I should whine about that. And all I got was this lousy t-shirt made out of forest moss. That would actually be interesting. A t-shirt made out of I have a lot of lousy t-shirts. I can tell you that. And I need to get some more, but zero made out of forest moss. I would go all the way to Wisconsin. Oh, yeah, it's a pandemic. No, I wouldn't. I guess I would drive there and, I don't know what, sleep in my car on the roadside. Although I will say, I've heard a lot of people who have hit the road lately and avoiding flying. They have been so far successful. Well, I guess they're going to be automatically successful in avoiding contracting COVID on a plane. If you don't get on a plane, it's not that you have fantastic planning or amazing insight into how the virus is spreading, other than the fact that, well, sometimes it spreads on planes, so I won't get on there. But at any rate, yeah, I guess I shouldn't be surprised at a perfect record at not getting COVID on a plane if you never get on a plane. But did you get it elsewhere is the real question. But people who have made road trips, and I haven't heard much in the way of people worried about themselves contracting COVID anymore from hotel rooms or from vacation rentals or what have you. I guess it's been a while since we learned that transmission from surfaces is a lot less dangerous, or a lot less risky, and a lot less possible than we originally thought. And so that's good news. And I guess, I don't know whether that's been exactly a boon to the hotel industry or not, but at least they're operating. And that weird feeling that you were going to be stuck in your house forever, always, and could never leave under any circumstances, so long as you are not already immune compromised, I suppose we should make an exception for those folks, is somewhat good news. But I've got no plans to do it. But I've heard a lot of people who have and who have made brief hotel stays here and there, and everything seems to be okay. But I don't know. You never know how these things are going to work out. Anyway, yeah, so I guess you could do that. Or I suppose you could always just have them mail the Forest Moss t-shirt to you, but you never know about the reliability of the mail either. So everything's falling apart today. All right, well, we have a lot we can turn our attention to, and a lot that I know I'm thinking already of saving things for discussion with Joan. I'm already anticipating this. Look, here's something that crossed my virtual desk this morning. All things are virtual now. I mean, the desk is right in front of me, but I keep a virtual desk online to look at. I don't know. I wanted to be a part of this online movement. I got nothing here. Stat News, where we visited a few times before, has an interesting article. Just maybe we'll just take the headline in the first couple of paragraphs to get a flavor for what's going on out there. Bill Gates slams shocking U.S. response to COVID-19 pandemic. Helen Branswell tells us over at Stat News. I guess it's only a matter of moments until Donald Trump discovers this and tells us that Bill Gates is really a loser and an idiot. He only has $1 bazillion, whereas Trump is still mired in a pool of debt that keeps him beholden to Russia and other foreign interests, not to mention politically beholden to domestically to big donors who actually have money, as opposed to him who swims in this pool of debt, grasping at whatever might be floating around at the time to keep his head above water so his hair doesn't get messed up. This is an also interesting thing. The beginning of the story refers to him as philanthropist Bill Gates, which he is one, but I think of him chiefly as the head of Microsoft and kind of a businessman. But, makes some significant chunk of his money, or rather, gives a significant chunk of money in philanthropy. So why not? He wants to be referred to that way, maybe. I don't know. Philanthropist Gil Bates, who's a different guy and who has a little goatee in the alternative world, has long warned of the need to prepare for pandemics. Aha. And he's dumbfounded by how poorly the United States has responded to COVID-19. I had not necessarily been paying attention to Bill Gates's prognostications on pandemics, but I can believe it given that I am somewhat aware of how much money he's given to philanthropic efforts aimed at healthcare, and in particular healthcare in developing nations, and they seem, I think, uniquely subject to pandemic illness given the state of their healthcare infrastructure. So I wouldn't doubt at all that he's had an eye on that. In an interview with Stat, Gates sounded exasperated at times as he described the badly bungled launch of COVID-19 testing, the enlisting of a neuroradiologist rather than an epidemiologist or infectious disease specialist to help guide the White House's response decisions, and the recent move to discourage testing of people who have been in contact with a known case but who aren't yet showing symptoms. This has been a mismanaged situation every step of the way, Gates said in the wide-ranging interview. I do know that. You're right. See how smart he is? He knows that I know that. It's shocking. It's unbelievable. The fact that we would be among the worst in the world. True. And I don't know. Do we stop here? I mean, you get the sense of what's going on here, and it's quite true. And we are among the worst in the world, and yet, I guess by way of transitioning into other news and other coverage, Donald Trump, of course, on the campaign trail saying the exact opposite, which is what you should anticipate Trump saying. And as you know, we've had good lessons around here about how to read a Trump comment. He's told his latest rally, and I think has he done another one since the super spreader event in Nevada? I don't think so. I think that's actually it. But he's been on Fox and Friends this morning blathering about stuff. But, he just tells everybody we're doing great. And, in fact, we're among the best in the world, which is really disheartening to see him lying like that. Jared Kushner apparently also on TV this morning telling everybody what a great success it's been. Again, and just reminding everybody, he's been saying that the response has been a great success since late April when there were 140,000 fewer dead at that point, of course, 60,000, just under 60,000 at the point at which he said it. And we are just shy of 200,000 by the Worldometers count this morning. That's where we stand. And let's see, I'll bring that one up. But I think we hit 199,000 on the nose in deaths yesterday before they closed down the count at, I guess, at midnight GMT. I think that's what they're working on over there. And, we left the count at 199,000. We picked up another 148 so far this morning. We'll pass probably 200,000 today. It's been a slow counting, thankfully. I mean, it's mercifully low death counts for the United States over the past couple of days, but I think it might just be a weekend slowdown kind of a thing. And we'll see. The only other possibility, of course, is, two other possibilities. One, it's going away like magic. That's the Trump feeling. Or two, we really are just slowing down testing to the point where we're just not going to pick up the number of people who are contracting the disease, and CDC having monkeyed enough and come under enough pressure from the administration and monkeyed enough with the numbers that the death count might be dropping as well. I've noticed in my own tracking of the metric, I'm the only one, I think, who's wasting his time tracking the new cases per day per 1 million in population by state. And I just, as is becoming clear to me, I don't think it's a great metric. It's not telling me so. It's very volatile. It fluctuates a lot. And I think a lot of states have found out how they can manipulate that statistic by redefining how somebody comes off the lists of active cases. And other states, I think, pardon me, have paid no attention to active cases counts at all and are doing nothing by way of reporting the numbers of people who have supposedly recovered from the disease. And so Worldometers is not taking them off of their active case rolls, and they just keep growing and growing. Whereas in Texas, they've either found the cure and not shared it with anybody, or they're just saying, yeah, if you leave the hospital, you're no longer an active case. Or if we don't hear from you within 10 days after you're reported as a positive, you're off the act. I don't know how they define it, but Texas has been shedding active cases like mad, like no one else, like nothing you've ever seen before. As a matter of fact, and it's kind of inexplicable. And I think other states are beginning to follow suit, and they're all red states for the most part. Anyway, as we were saying, I'll just wrap up what Bill Gates was saying here. He was, when he was talking about the neuroradiologist, I guess, you remember, I can't recall the guy's name offhand because he's just not an important figure in this field, not important enough for us to have talked about him enough times. But, you remember we covered that story just the other day, and I'll just wind up with one more paragraph. He leveled his harshest criticism at Food and Drug Administration Commissioner Stephen Hahn, interesting, who mischaracterized findings from a Mayo Clinic study on COVID-19 and said researchers had seen a 35% survival benefit with the use of convalescent plasma. Many of you know I was a cancer doctor before I became FDA commissioner, Hahn said at the time, and a 35% improvement in survival is a pretty substantial clinical benefit. And, well, the criticism is this. This is third grade math. I mean, are you kidding? Gates said. The head of the FDA got up and said it was a 35% death reduction when it's not even a 3% reduction based on just a tiny little subset that was non-statistical. This is unheard of. But it's not unheard of. They do these sort of things all the time. It was just sort of an interesting comment on how they're doing the math. And that one doesn't immediately jump out as making intuitive sense to me. But I'll go with Bill Gates on this one, I suppose. But I am struck by, I recall the interview with, what's his name? Jonathan Swan, was it, from Axios, who is interviewing the president. And they have different approaches to calculating the number of deaths and comparing countries across borders, how different countries are doing. And the president has this bizarro definition of how to get to the death statistics, that it was the number of deaths per 1 million population, as the Axios folks were putting it. And the president was using the number of deaths per positive cases, which was a totally different kind of statistic. I mean, it's an interesting statistic, but it's a different kind of statistic. And you remember, you can't do that. You remember, we found out that the president would just resorted to just sort of childlike temper tantrums. You can't do that. You can't do that. That's not what I have. Yeah, well, it's what the rest of the world is using. And apparently they love finding, like we do, finding new metrics. Except I occasionally check with myself. Am I learning anything from this metric? Does it tell me anything about the development of the disease? And I'm not so sure that one does. But I am hoping that one day soon we'll have a standardized idea of what constitutes an active case versus a recovered case. Because that would make sense to know. You would want to know that. And I'm glad that Worldometers has that as a statistic, but I don't know if they're getting accurate reports from the rest of the country or the rest of the world on that one. All right. So coming around to other topics to spend some time with here. Let me mark this one so I can share it with you later on in our summary. You can read all about what Bill Gates has to say. there are other shocking stories that we're going to need to spend some time on. And some of them more shocking, I suppose, and dismaying than others. So, let's see. This one made the rounds yesterday. And unusual source. I'm not always picking up on, although I've seen the source before. Law and Crime, a Dan Abrams production, is what's up here in the header. I don't really actually know exactly what I'm looking at now that I think about it, but where's the report come from? Let's see if we can trace its provenance. But this was shared around yesterday, and I think we have since had some confirmation from some other publications, although I don't know if I booked them here for sharing, but I'm pretty sure that I saw some additional discussion of this one. But a whistleblower report here that is of some interest, and I suppose this one, I guess, comes with, I'm trying to learn about when to give people trigger warnings. I never really understood exactly what would constitute the basis for giving one, other than a few things that are pretty well defined, and I've seen it happen a lot more. I don't know how to guess properly, but this feels like one of those sorts of things, I think, that maybe ought to get somewhere. There's some disturbing, well, it's not imagery, of course, but I guess verbal imagery in this. So I warn you that the next few minutes could be disturbing for you if you haven't heard this story already. Like an experimental concentration camp, the headline begins. Whistleblower complaint alleges mass hysterectomies at ICE detention center. This is reported by Jerry Lamb, Lambe, and it comes with an update up at the top here from yesterday evening. U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement has responded to this story with a statement that said, generally speaking, anonymous, unproven allegations made without any fact-checkable specifics should be treated with skepticism. The agency said it takes all allegations seriously and defers to the DHS Office of Inspector General, but not so far as denying things. We deny it, but if you want more specifics, then it didn't happen. You have to talk to someone else. So let's see. They have their full statement up at the top, but as you can imagine, the more important or more interesting story is down below. They deny everything. They say they're taking the allegations seriously. They say that their detention center, in this case the Irwin County Detention Center, has been inspected multiple times with and without warning, and that the facility has been found in compliance with performance-based national detention standards, which I don't think exactly addresses the question, but that shouldn't surprise you. And here is the story and the question. Several legal advocacy groups on Monday filed a whistleblower complaint on behalf of a nurse at an Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, detention center, documenting jarring medical neglect within the facility, including a refusal to test detainees for the novel coronavirus and an exorbitant rate of hysterectomies being performed on immigrant women. That's weird, don't you think? The nurse, Dawn Wooten, so anonymous, blah, 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 unproven, and it's not anonymous. Her name's Dawn Wooten. I mean, that was their first objection, right? Anonymous, unproven allegations. I suppose they qualify as unproven at the moment. Made without any fact-checkable specifics. A bunch of hysterectomies. That sounds like something you could maybe start investigating. What's your complaint? Generally medical badness. That I can't investigate. Too many hysterectomies. All right. Well, I know where to start. That sounds pretty specific. What's your name, anonymous person? Dawn Wooten. All right. So that claim goes out the window. The nurse, Dawn Wooten, was employed at the Irwin County Detention Center. They abbreviated here ICDC. So we'll see if that comes up again. It's in Georgia. And interestingly enough, operated by LaSalle Corrections, not like the state of Georgia or the federal government. That means it's a private prison. It's a private prison company, LaSalle Corrections. The complaint was filed with the Office of Inspector General of the Department of Homeland Security, which, of course, as you know, has nobody at the helm of that very important and very expansive department, and maybe that's part of the problem. So, filed with the Inspector General by advocacy groups Project South, Georgia Detention Watch, Georgia Latino Alliance for Human Rights, and South Georgia Immigrant Support Network. Multiple women came forward to tell Project South about what they perceived to be the inordinate rate at which women in ICDC were subjected to hysterectomies. And they helpfully explain it's a surgical operation in which all or part of the uterus is removed. Most of us, I think, knew that already, but just in case. Additionally, many of the immigrant women who underwent this procedure were reportedly confused when asked to explain why they had had the surgery, with one detainee likening the treatment to prisoners in concentration camps, which, remember, we're not supposed to do. That's bad. It's overzealous. Recently, a detained immigrant told Project South that she talked to 5 different women detained at ICDC between October and December 2019 who had a hysterectomy done. The complaint, that's what was stated in the complaint. When she talked to them about the surgery, the women reacted confused when explaining why they had one done. The women told Project South that it was as though the women were trying to tell themselves it's going to be okay. When I met all these women who had had surgeries, I thought this was like an experimental concentration camp. It was like they're experimenting with our bodies, the detainee said. I'm not sure what the experiment is here, but it certainly seems inappropriate and dangerous and a little bit genocidal. According to Wooten, ICDC consistently used a particular gynecologist. And here's where the problem lies. I think you might have one, you might have more, but you have this mad doctor out there who's a lunatic and is unchecked in the private prison system, doing whatever the hell he's up to on immigrant detainees to whom no one has any access. And I think, unfortunately, the vast majority of the country just doesn't spend that much time thinking about from day to day. We all generally are aware of what's going on, and many of us, Democratic-leaning voters, essentially, liberal-leaning voters, progressive-leaning voters, have made an issue of it, and 40% of the country either doesn't care or loves it, which is problematic. But it's all happening, of course, behind closed doors and away from our observation, and just by the nature of the fact that they're in a detention camp. Anyway, according to Wooten, the ICDC consistently used a particular gynecologist outside the facility. So surprise inspections of ICDC, planned or unplanned, announced or not, doesn't tell us anything about what's going on outside the facility. That's why the denial is so worthless. Anyway, this particular gynecologist almost always opted to remove all or part of the uterus of his female detainee patients. And I don't know whether that's anybody who comes to him for whatever reason, or this doctor only sees people who are acute patients of some kind, or whether everybody for routine medical visits is sent to this outside gynecologist and he's like, hey, you need a hysterectomy, and no one knows why. Everybody he sees has a hysterectomy. Just about everybody, Wooten said, adding that everybody's uterus cannot be that bad. We've questioned among ourselves, goodness, he's taking everybody's stuff out. That's his specialty. He's the uterus collector, which is about as grim a thought as I could possibly imagine about a story like this. I know that's ugly. He is collecting these things or something. Everybody he sees, he's taking all their uteruses out, or he's taking their tubes out. What in the world? That's the quote from Wooten here. I mean, that's crazy. I don't know what the numbers are. I don't know what's going on there. I'm relying on her description of what's happening, but she's got it right. What in the world? What does explain this? Wooten, who is being represented in the matter by the Government Accountability Project, also confirmed that many of the detained women told her that they didn't understand why they were being forced to have the procedure. She explained that some of the nurses who didn't speak Spanish obtained consent from detainees, quote, by simply Googling Spanish. I don't know what they Googled, or they might have actually Googled the right stuff. Who knows? Consent, I suppose, might come across correctly. I don't know. But it's just it's a little scary. And I don't know how else they would do it except that, you could get a Spanish speaker in there who could actually communicate with people before seeking their signature on consent forms for surgery. Anyway, let's continue on here. The complaint details several accounts from detainees, including one woman who was not properly anesthetized during the procedure. How crazy is that? That's just torture at that point. Not properly anesthetized during the procedure, and heard the aforementioned doctor tell the nurse he had mistakenly removed the wrong ovary, resulting in her losing all reproductive ability. Another said she was scheduled for the procedure, but when she questioned why it was necessary, she was given at least 3 completely different answers. I don't know whether it was just a Google error or what. She was originally told by the doctor that she had an ovarian cyst and was going to have a small 20-minute procedure done. It says here, drilling 3 small holes in her stomach to drain the cyst, which I gather was a laparoscopic procedure. That's usually what we're talking about when we have we don't say drilling, but cutting 3 small holes in the abdomen to give access to that. The officer who was transporting her to the hospital told her that she was receiving a hysterectomy to have her womb removed. When the hospital refused to operate on her, why? Because she had a COVID-19 test that came back positive. It says here, positive for antibodies, though. Is that what they're really looking for in these tests? Anyway, she was transferred instead back to ICDC, where the ICDC nurse said that the procedure she was going to have entailed, it says here, dilating her vagina and scraping tissue off. That is difficult to imagine what they thought they were doing with that. And I don't know whether they meant cervix, or I don't know exactly what's going on here with this one. But troubling that you can't get an explanation for major surgery out of any one of the 3 people in whose hands you are placed by the federal government. It's crazy. Hi everybody, it's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. When we left off, we were running through the various excuses that the medical personnel at ICDC and I guess affiliated outside quote-unquote medical care providers were giving to at least one of the women taken to the hospital supposedly, reportedly for a hysterectomy, but maybe also something else or something else entirely. There's no telling exactly what they were planning to do, and they didn't bother telling her exactly what they were planning to do. We left off saying she was returned from the hospital when her COVID-19 test came back positive for antibodies, which I'm still not entirely sure whether now we're talking about they have performed the right test here. I mean, I thought COVID-19 antibodies would tell you that there was evidence that somebody had been exposed to the coronavirus before, but not necessarily that they were currently infected or capable of transmitting the virus. But I'm not 100% certain about that one. But I know that there was a big difference for a while. It made headlines that if you were testing for antibodies, you might be testing basically for the wrong thing if you were trying to figure out who has the disease now and has got a communicable form of it. But it doesn't sound like they were doing any of the medical care correctly at any stage in all of this. Okay, so there was even one more explanation given to this woman. A nurse told her later on that the procedure she was really having was one to mitigate her heavy menstrual bleeding, which the woman had, of course, never experienced, and so wouldn't be seeking treatment for that. When she explained that, the nurse responded by getting angry and agitated and began yelling at her, which sounds like the nurse is under a tremendous amount of stress and might have some idea of just how wrong things are going over there. According to The Intercept, which I guess originally reported on this information, and I opened up their article, I think they took a slightly different tack on this, but this was certainly part of it. According to The Intercept, ICE declined to comment on the allegations in the complaint, while a LaSalle Corrections spokesperson said it was firmly committed to the health and welfare of those in our care. That's what you say in these situations. We're deeply committed to delivering high-quality, culturally responsive services in safe and humane environments, the person said. Deeply committed to Googling Spanish for those culturally responsive services. Law and Crime, the publication we're reading from now, reached out to ICE for comment. They also reached out to the Department of Homeland Security's Inspector General to ask whether it has received the complaint and whether it will investigate the allegations in it. We will update this story if they receive responses, and you can read the full complaint embedded by Scribd in the article here. Let's see. Now, the updates that we read at the beginning were comments from ICE but no comment from the Office of the Inspector General at this point. So I don't know if that's something you should ordinarily anticipate at this stage of the game for the OIG to say anything. The Intercept, which has also been itself in the news lately, some interesting stories developing on that one. Their approach to it, written by Jose Olivares and John Washington. A silent pandemic is their headline. Nurse at ICE facility blows the whistle on coronavirus dangers. So a coronavirus angle on that one. ICDC, run by LaSalle Corrections, has refused to test detainees and underreported COVID-19 cases, the nurse says. So slightly different angle of approach on the medical neglect going on there. But law and crime, focusing on the one, certainly the most outrageous angle on it. And I have to agree that the reactions I've seen are right along the lines of the woman that they quoted in the complaint, that it's something like something out of a concentration camp, like a Joseph Mengele story. I don't know what the experiment would be, but it could just be, like I said, one of those crazy doctors that does this kind of bizarre nonsense. There was, how long ago was it? There was the uproar about the doctor who, you might recall, the right wing latched on to the whole thing as an outrage story about what they love to term late term abortions. And I guess one of the few doctors that were performing these procedures turned out to be a complete maniac, mass murderer type. I don't know what to tell you. He just was killing people and damaging them horribly. Even he wasn't killing them, with unsanitary conditions and all kinds of insanity. And he was rightly arrested and convicted. But you get these sorts of things occasionally. And I would imagine that such a person would probably feel most secure operating in a situation exactly like this on patients who had no advocates, patients who were outsiders to the system, considered certainly in their part of southern Georgia as others and undesirables, and the fact that they were locked up to begin with was supposed to be taken as a signal by the rest of society that whatever goes on with these people behind closed doors is of no concern to us, and besides which they wouldn't be locked up if they hadn't done something wrong in the first place, and they're bad people. And the fact that they get lousy medical care, well, of course they do. They shouldn't come to this country and expect free, luxurious conditions and medical care. Yeah, but you should get humane treatment. But they even reject that, of course. Your Trump supporters don't think that. They will honestly tell you, many of them face to face, no, I don't believe that immigration detainees deserve humane treatment. They're illegal. They're breaking the law in this country, and they deserve what they get. And they think that about a lot of people, anybody who's detained, whether they're American citizens in prison rightly or wrongly. They don't care. If you're there, you're there. And so he's picked victims that have no advocates, no way of getting their story out, about whom hardly anyone cares, and about whom news is very difficult to come by, and to be doing it not only in a prison setting, but in a private prison setting where there's this additional layer of protection for bad operators and no, general sense among the general public of what sort of accountability there ought to be through the chain of command. Well, they're private, but they're operating a public system. And if we turn to the government, the government has its excuses for not giving out information. Private sector has its own excuses for not giving out information. And the likelihood of getting to the truth by yourself anyway is next to zero. So this sounds like a pretty serious situation, and as others have expressed it, I think it falls well within bounds of the kinds of things that qualify as crimes against humanity. They don't they're a little bit akin to war crimes, but as we're reminded, crimes against humanity don't require a wartime setting, so it can happen at any time. Of course, the United States rejects all international jurisdiction over the United States for situations like this. But I don't know whether that's going to be forever, but it certainly is the case under the Trump administration, and they're making a real practice of it across the board. In fact, I have another story about that. We mentioned it not that long ago, and so a reminder that story is out there, a opinion piece by Max Boot, who's somewhat more conservative a source than we usually go to, but his name does come up from time to time these days because he's at least, staked out a position in anti-Trump world, which is the right place to be. Here's the headline on his piece from just the other day. Trump joins the world's worst human rights violators in waging war on the ICC. Here, not the Interstate Commerce Commission, but the International Criminal Court. And we made brief mention of the fact that this story was happening. Let's, I guess we can dive a little bit more into it now. The opportunity presents itself. President Trump refuses to confront Vladimir Putin over Russia's alleged bounties on U.S. troops in Afghanistan, clashes with U.S. forces in Syria, the imprisonment of 2 Marine Corps veterans, the poisoning of a prominent opposition leader, threats to intervene in Belarus, and attacks on the U.S. elections. The Trump administration appears to be much more exercised about the actions of 2 of Africa's most prominent human rights lawyers who are seeking to uphold the rule of law. Remember how much he loves the rule of law? I mean, he doesn't, but how much he likes to say he does. How did Fatou Bensouda, I'm hoping I'm close on the pronunciation here, and Fakiso Mochochoko, I'm guessing where the emphasis lies there. Fatou Bensouda and Fakiso Mochochoko. Wow. How did they recently wind up on the U.S. Treasury Department's sanctions list alongside drug kingpins and war criminals? Their offense is to work at the International Criminal Court in The Hague. Yeah, that's the one. Bensouda is the chief prosecutor, and Mochochoka is the court's head of jurisdiction. So important personages of some distinction. Since its formation in 2002, the ICC has become known primarily for prosecuting African war criminals. In 2015, for example, the court issued an arrest warrant for Ahmed Al-Faqi Al-Madhi, an enforcer for Ansar Dine, I guess I'm just guessing at that pronunciation, and Al-Qaeda, who we know about, in the Islamic Maghreb, when in 2012, those terrorist groups imposed a fundamentalist version of Sharia law in Timbuktu, Mali. He was extradited by Niger, Niger, is that how they're pronouncing it? And after pleading guilty in 2016, sentenced to 9 years imprisonment for destroying religious and historical buildings. The court's record is far from perfect, Boot notes here. Far too many criminals have escaped its grasp, and prosecutions have dragged on for too long, but at least it is trying to hold some of the worst human rights violators in the world to account. You would think that this would earn the approval of the United States. It usually does, but not this time. The driving force, the United States, was behind the 1948 Universal Declaration of Human Rights. But you would be wrong. Trump and his Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, have chosen to take their stand alongside notorious human rights violators such as, you'll never guess, Russia, China, North Korea, and Sudan, just to throw that one in there, in opposition to the ICC. Admittedly, Washington has never been a full-throated supporter of the ICC. President Bill Clinton authorized U.S. officials to sign the Rome Statute creating the ICC, but President George W. Bush withdrew the signature in 2002, and Congress passed legislation requiring a cutoff of U.S. aid to any governments that would even consider turning over U.S. personnel to the ICC, because, of course, the ICC, by rights, would probably be investigating some people who actually were Americans for violation of human rights, because they may have violated human rights. And it makes sense. But they're Americans, and we can't have that, according to George W. Bush and now Donald Trump. Let's see. Kneecapping the ICC was a peculiar passion of John Bolton, Bush's Undersecretary of State and UN ambassador, and most recently Trump's national security advisor. However, the United States has also cooperated with the ICC. The Bush administration supported a UN Security Council decision to refer abuses in Darfur to the ICC, and the Obama administration supported a referral for Libya. No previous administration has been as hostile to the ICC as this one, Trump's. In June, Trump declared a national emergency because the ICC had announced an investigation into possible war crimes committed in Afghanistan by the Taliban, the Afghan government, and, yes, the U.S. military and intelligence personnel. Kabul has asked for the ICC to suspend its investigation, pending legal action by Afghan authorities. Because of this request and the COVID-19 pandemic, Human Rights Watch reports that the ICC is not actively investigating Afghanistan. There is, in short, no reason to assume, as Trump and Pompeo seem to, that U.S. personnel are about to be hauled off to The Hague, though maybe they ought to be, or in the unlikely event that they do end up in the dock, that they would fail to receive a fair trial. Just last year, two prominent defendants, one of them the former president of Ivory Coast, were acquitted on charges of crimes against humanity, so it does happen. The Trump administration is also aggrieved that the ICC has been considering an investigation of possible war crimes committed in the Palestinian territories by Israel, as well as its enemies. But the ICC has previously refused to open an investigation of Israel's 2010 attack on a flotilla bound for the Gaza Strip, and it has not announced any decision to prosecute Israel, so this concern, too, is at best premature. The ICC is a court of last resort. It acts only if national authorities refuse to do so, which would be the case here in the United States, of course. Trump could actually blunt any impetus for ICC action by taking serious steps to investigate and punish U.S. personnel guilty of misconduct in Afghanistan, but by pardoning alleged war criminals, he is doing the opposite, sending an arrogant message of impunity for U.S. misconduct. Trump's war against the ICC places the Trump administration once again at odds with America's closest allies. 67 nations, including Australia, Canada, France, Germany, and the United Kingdom, have condemned Trump's sanctions and expressed support for the ICC. We remain committed to an international rules-based order, they wrote in June. The ICC is an integral part of this order and a central institution in the fight against impunity and the pursuit of justice, which are essential components of sustainable peace, security, and reconciliation, except for us. The United States, too, used to be a committed participant in an international rules-based order. No longer. Trump has turned America into a rogue regime that is hostile to laws and norms, whether at home or abroad. A good point, and well worth reviving that story for. I think when we first read about it, it was the news that the ICC's top personnel and their investigators had been refused entry into the United States and then were subsequently placed on the terrorism watch list, of all places, in order to prevent them from entering the country and conducting research that might seek to hold American personnel accountable for misconduct in Afghanistan or anywhere else. We're just not having it here. So I don't know. I guess no international travel for those folks for the foreseeable future. And I guess otherwise they'll snatch them up elsewhere and other countries will sustain it. So I don't know. Not that they were able to enter those other countries anyway, thanks to our mishandling of the COVID-19 pandemic. So I suppose that was going to keep them at home anyway. Let's see. Other news, I guess, I don't know. I was reminded in the middle of reading this one, I guess, I'm not sure exactly what it was that jumped out at me that reminded me. But yes, I did mention earlier in the show that Trump has spent his morning calling into Fox and Friends, complaining that sleepy Joe Biden has too much energy, in his opinion, so he must be on drugs. That's a fun accusation, and of course a bit of projection there, I'm sure. And insisting that Biden ought to take a drug test. He says, I'll take one too, which of course he wouldn't. But that's the thing you say when you're in the middle of an accusation against somebody else, I suppose. Of course, there's a lot of tests that he ought to submit himself to and hasn't. Although I would be interested in the results of an actual drug test on Donald Trump. But he figures that it's warranted because Biden is too peppy. He has too much energy. I saw him in the debates and he was saying, he thought he was underperforming in the debates because there were 600 people on the stage and he wasn't running around screaming over people like Trump does. And he took that as being low energy. But now that he's the nominee and is able to deliver his message unimpeded by competitors on the stage, why he must be on drugs in order for him to stay awake and do such things. Which I think tells you exactly what's going on with Trump. He's taking drugs in order to stay awake through the various things that he's doing. I'd love to get a hold of a drug test on him. But while we're testing him, I suppose we might as well just point out, and as long as we're making accusations without any repercussions, why don't we just throw this one out there? Trump is a rapist and ought to take a DNA test. But, he's not going to be doing that either. But I'd take the results of a real drug test on that guy. He's pretty strung out from what appears obvious to the rest of us. But okay, he's just guessing about Biden, and I'm just guessing about him. I don't know. Of course, Biden's medical records have been available, and Trump's are not. So I guess there's that, too. All right, let's see. Other things to check in on. Here's some additional news. Just following up on a story we've spent some time on before, and this will give you something to do for the rest of the day, I guess. A federal judge, rules that Chad Wolf is likely unlawfully serving as Homeland Security Secretary and temporarily blocks some asylum restrictions as a result. Laura Lee, L-Y, Lee, or L-Y, Lee, and Paul LeBlanc, reporting this for CNN, a federal judge in Maryland, has ruled that Chad Wolf is likely, I'm not certain exactly how he puts it here, likely unlawfully serving as acting secretary of the Department of Homeland Security and temporarily barred the Trump administration from enforcing new asylum restrictions on members of two immigration advocacy groups. Judge Paula Zinis, it's Xinis, Zinis, I'm not certain how you would pronounce this one, in a 69-page ruling, and everyone knows that's a nice number of pages, issued on Friday, wrote that the two groups are, quote, likely to demonstrate that former acting Homeland Security Secretary Kevin McClellan's appointment was itself invalid under the agency's applicable order of succession, and so he lacked the authority to amend the order of succession in the department's own regulations that then ensured Wolf's installation as acting secretary. So you see what's going on here. Remember, I think we explained this once before. Subsequently, Wolf, because he was illegally appointed here, didn't have the authority to impose the asylum rules that are being challenged. According to the judge here, new requirements, which court documents say took effect in late August, concern employment, and the case is ongoing. The appointments of Wolf and his number two, Ken Cuccinelli, who is certainly number two, no doubt about that, to the top leadership roles in the Department of Homeland Security have increasingly come under scrutiny, both though continue to serve in their posts, allegedly. I don't think that they do. But they certainly contend that they're there legally and need to be given due deference here. The Trump administration appealed the federal judge's ruling earlier this year that it was unlawful to appoint Cuccinelli to lead the agency responsible for processing U.S. immigration requests, and he remains in that post more than 6 months later. The case before Zinis is ongoing. I guess this was a different judge's ruling about Cuccinelli. Let's see. Does it say? I mean, it was certainly a separate case, but it could have been, I suppose, the same judge. But no, I can't tell off the bat. Oh, there we are. Yes, different judge. Randolph D. Moss, U.S. District Court judge in that case. So two federal judges have said that about, well, the two different top officials, alleged officials at Department of Homeland Security. But this one concerns Chad Wolf, and I thought it would be an opportune time for you to spend your day, as I did yesterday, reporting the verified Twitter account being used allegedly by the purported acting Secretary of Homeland Security, Chad Wolf. He is, of course, impersonating the actual legitimate acting Secretary of Homeland Security. I understand he has now finally been nominated formally for the Secretary's job, which allegedly would cure some of the defects in his other orders, I suppose, but or allow him to remain in office. But he didn't get to the office in legal fashion the first time. I'm not certain that he's entitled to the deference that we give to somebody whose nomination is pending on moving from the acting role into the permanent role. But I'd like to know what the answer is over at Twitter and Twitter security, why this guy continues to be able to disseminate misinformation by pretending to be the acting Deputy Homeland Security Secretary when a federal judge says he's not. Federal court says no, but Twitter says yes. That seems weird to me, at least in terms of the verification. At a minimum, they ought to remove his verification. Why are you vouching for something that a federal court says isn't so? That's not a position you want to be in legally for any reason. You can allow him to have an account. You can allow him to allege he's the acting secretary, but you shouldn't verify it for him. He says it. We don't dispute it. We're just not going to verify it. I think that seems like a pretty reasonable position to take on this thing, if not banning him altogether. But okay. So where were we? Yes, there was the ruling about Cuccinelli. CNN has reached out to the department for comment. Last month, a coalition of 20 state attorneys general and 10 cities and counties challenged rules imposed by the Trump administration that they argued limited access to employment authorization for asylum seekers. New York Attorney General Letitia James's office said Monday. The first rule would require asylum seekers to wait a year before applying for employment authorization and bar many from obtaining authorization at all. The second rule in question here would eliminate the long-standing requirement that employment authorization applications be processed within 30 days, thus allowing such applications to sit untouched indefinitely, James's office said. These applications, of course, would, I guess, ordinarily weigh heavily in any decisions about awarding people asylum. Zinis found, that's the judge, that DHS completely sidestepped this critical impact of the new rules and never wrestled with the fundamental implications of deferring or denying advance work authorization. Substantially limiting approval of work authorization for bona fide asylees will inevitably affect their ability to afford the costs of seeking asylum, including hiring legal counsel, Zinis wrote. Zinis's order granted injunctive relief to only members of Casa de Maryland Incorporated and Asylum Seeker Advocacy Project, two of the lawsuit's plaintiffs that the judge found to have demonstrated associational standing at this stage, finding the relief both proper and necessary to avoid irreparable harm. I guess this just means that the ruling applies solely to the plaintiffs in this case, and not necessarily to all similarly situated asylees around the country. They'll have to sue on their own. They can probably use this to build on, but they'll have to do it by themselves. The organizations have approximately 100,000 and 4,000 members each, according to the judge's order. James welcomed the ruling, calling Wolf a man with, quote, no authority and no business sitting in the chair of the acting Secretary of Homeland Security. Not only is this decision welcome news for asylum seekers who were unfairly targeted by the Trump administration, but the courts have now found that Chad Wolf has no authority at the Department of Homeland Security, she said. CNN has previously reported that the Government Accountability Office found that Wolf and Cuccinelli, the senior official performing the duties of deputy secretary, were appointed as part of an invalid order of succession. We vehemently disagree with what the GAO has put out, Wolf told CNN's Jake Tapper at the time. Wolf has been at the forefront of a host of issues like immigration, civil unrest, and the coronavirus pandemic, and as a result has come under criticism for his actions. I don't know how you could avoid it, being in charge of those three things. During Wolf's tenure, the department has been marked by a focus on the border wall, a fight with New York over global entry, and more recently a deployment of federal officers to Portland, Oregon, in opposition to federal officials, or other local officials. Wolf has been, allegedly, purportedly, the acting secretary since November of 2019. We, of course, disagree with that, but the department has not had a confirmed secretary since April of 2019, when former Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen was forced to resign. President Donald Trump last month announced that he would officially appoint Wolf to take over the role on a permanent basis, and his nomination was formally sent to the Senate last week. Of course, they didn't send a copy to me. I can't be sure they did it properly. I don't know. It's just purported that that's the case. Show me the paperwork, as always. Why not? You make that demand. Make them do the work. Don't take their word for it. He's fooled us before. Or maybe he's never fooled us, but he's tried, and you and I haven't let him, but I guess the rest of the world has. What a shame. We'll be right back. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Networks Radio. Wow, so much happening here, and just trying to decide still what direction to go. We'll save the other stories still for Joan's segment later on. Maybe we'll continue with this sort of theme and clean up on some of these stories that we have not gotten to before. Sticking with or playing off of the story about the ICC prosecutors being barred from the United States, we might as well update you on this situation the New York Times reported on. What's the date on this thing? Michael LaForgia and Edward Wong writing yesterday on the 14th. I have so many articles in pocket, it's hard to tell what day they come from. I've scrolled so far down, but it's still just from yesterday. Here's the headline: War crimes risk grows for U.S. over Saudi strikes in Yemen. I think you can probably imagine the connection, but let's get the details here. Subheader here: State Department officials have raised alarms about the legal risk in aiding airstrikes that kill civilians. The Trump administration recently suppressed findings as it sold more weapons to Gulf nations. Seems to be the primary project of Jared Kushner, who ironically is concluding these weapons sales deals with cover. I think he knows that it's generally regarded around the world as problematic, to give you the widest umbrella term here that's possible. Problematic that the United States is making these enormous sales of weapons to the wealthy monarchs and oligarchs of the Persian Gulf nations, and in particular the Arabian Peninsula Persian Gulf nations, not on the other side of the Persian Gulf. That they're not doing, I think. Who knows? Maybe Eric Prince is taking care of that part. I don't know. Anyway, yes, and so of course in a lot of cases these are two regimes which are at war in Yemen and bombing relatively indiscriminately and killing civilians along the way. But even if they weren't doing this, the arms sales are problematic by themselves. And what's interesting is that it seems like the window dressing that's supposed to distract our attention from the fact that these weapons sales are being made. And the weapons sales, I think, are suspect and dirty all by themselves and probably involve some illicit profit for Trump and Kushner themselves, or at least their cronies. But they're supposed to, I think they're intended as window dressing, or rather, they're supposed to be shielded by the window dressing of these weird announcements of peace deals with Israel. But in the story maybe we'll get to a little bit later on, as it turns out, the peace deals with Israel are themselves suspect and just generally bogus and unnecessary on their face. But first, Yemen and the situation reported on here by the Times. When President Trump hosts the signing of a diplomatic agreement between Israel and the United Arab Emirates Tuesday, that would be today, and one of the latest quote-unquote peace deals on the table, the White House ceremony will also serve as tacit recognition of Mr. Trump's embrace of arms sales as a cornerstone of his foreign policy. The president sweetened the Middle East deal with a secret commitment to sell advanced fighter jets and lethal drones to the Emirates. And I suspect it might have been the other way around. His original intention was to sell these weapons to the UAE, and he felt that the only way he could do that was with the cover of a UAE-Israeli peace deal. You see, this is chiefly about peace, and as a reward for committing to peace with Israel, which everyone knows is, quote-unquote, peace in the Middle East. Now, there are other countries in the Middle East besides Israel and its enemies, for that matter, but other countries besides Israel. And the UAE can very easily be at peace with one of them, but at war with another. But if they're both in the Middle East, then you don't have peace in the Middle East. But we tend to conceptualize of peace in the Middle East as peace involving Israel and its Arab neighbors. And so they're using that blanket. Of course, this is a peaceful nation. You can see they've concluded a peace with Israel. That's not what everybody wanted. Now, because they're peaceful, we can trust them with weapons, because obviously those weapons would be just for self-defense, not for an offensive and equally offensive war in Yemen or anywhere else for that matter, or for suppression of domestic dissent for that matter. So that's the cover here. But of course, well, in case we don't get to the story, bottom line on this is the UAE and Israel, I'm sure weren't on necessarily the friendliest terms, but they don't share a border. And for the most part, Israel's difficulties with the Arab world, the outside Arab world, outside of Palestine, although it's all centered on the Palestinian question, its troubles with the other Arab nations have been about its occupation of territory, or its right to exist at all, for that matter. And so the problem has chiefly been with the border states, though material support certainly has been provided by other Arab nations that don't share a border, Iraq among them. But the Arabian Peninsula nations have, for the most part, been far enough removed that their support doesn't go beyond the ideological or occasional, I'm sure, material support as well. But they don't directly conflict or participate in the conflicts with Israel. And so a peace deal between UAE and Israel is nothing. Another one was recently concluded with Bahrain. Same situation there. There's no war between Israel and those countries. So a peace deal between them, I mean, peace is nice. And it's certainly, maybe it even rids us of the ideological opposition to Israel's existence. Maybe changes behavior. I don't know. That's all a good thing. But it's not something to be rewarded with weapons of war because, well, so what? You're going to cease offering material support for war in Israel and instead turn your material to actual prosecution of a war in Yemen? That's no bargain. But anyway, it doesn't make any sense, but that's what's going on. So, We left off by saying the president had sweetened the Middle East deal, which isn't even a deal, with a secret commitment to sell them lots of weapons so that they could kill a different group of people in the Middle East. But White House officials are working to push through the weapons transfer in the face of broader concerns that the president's arms sales policies could lead to charges of war crimes against American officials, a New York Times examination has found. Those concerns stemming from U.S. support for Saudi Arabia and the Emirates as they have waged a disastrous war in Yemen, using American equipment in attacks that have killed thousands of civilians, will be the subject of congressional hearings on Wednesday. House lawmakers are expected to question top State Department officials over their role in keeping weapons flowing into the conflict and burying recent internal findings on civilian casualties and the legal peril for Americans. You ought at least to pay attention to that, if nothing else, even if you don't care about lives in the Middle East. Interviews with more than a dozen current and former U.S. government officials show that the legal fears related to the arms sales run far deeper than previously reported. Over the course of 2 presidential administrations, those concerns have prompted some officials to consider hiring their own lawyers and discuss the risk of being arrested while vacationing overseas, which they should be anyway, just because they're probably carrying contagion, as you know. Most countries are excluding us anyhow. But okay. But take note, by the way, it does say over the course of 2 presidential administrations, and you know which one preceded this current administration, so take that as you will. But do take it. Concerns intensified under Mr. Trump as senior officials pursuing his arms sale agenda clashed with rank-and-file federal workers who review and approve lethal exports. No episode in recent American history compares to Yemen, legal scholars say, where the United States has provided material support over 5 years for actions that have caused the continuous killing of civilians. United Nations investigators last week issued a detailed report on atrocities in Yemen that asked the Security Council to refer actions by all parties to the International Criminal Court for potential war crimes prosecution. Regardless of whether that occurs, prosecutors in a foreign court could charge American officials based on them knowing of the pattern of indiscriminate killing, legal scholars say. Some countries, including Sweden and Germany, assert universal jurisdiction over war crimes. Spanish judicial officials in 2009, remember this, pursued charges related to the torture of prisoners in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, against 6 officials in the George W. Bush administration, but he's a nice guy now, citing universal jurisdiction, but a higher court dismissed the case. This March, the International Criminal Court ruled that its chief prosecutor could open an investigation into the actions of American forces in the Afghanistan war. The first time the court has authorized a case against the United States. We were, of course, as we said, central to its foundation, and so I guess everybody sort of figured we'd be on our best behavior, but apparently not. The Trump administration this month imposed sanctions on that prosecutor and another of the court's lawyers, a sign of how seriously the administration takes the possibility of prosecution, which probably means it's warranted. Yet, rather than taking meaningful steps to address the potential legal issues raised by the Yemen war, State Department leaders have gone to great lengths to conceal them, records and interviews show. When an internal investigation this year revealed that the department had failed to address the legal risks of selling bombs to the Saudis and their partners, top agency officials found ways to hide this. They ensured that the Inspector General relegated details to a classified portion of a public report released in August, then insisted on heavily redacting the classified materials so that even lawmakers with security clearance couldn't see it. In 2016, when a State Department lawyer determined that American officials could plausibly be charged with war crimes, the department's top lawyers decided not to send the analysis to the Secretary of State's office, though it was shared with some agency officials. If I were in the State Department, I would be freaking out about my potential for liability, said Una Hathaway, a Yale Law School professor and a Defense Department lawyer in the Obama administration. I think anyone who's involved in this program should get themselves a lawyer. It's very dangerous territory the U.S. is in, continuing to provide support given the number of civilians who've been killed. The State Department's failure to elevate a substantial legal finding on the U.S. role in Yemen is emblematic of what scholars of executive powers say has been an increasingly problematic practice across administrations. Government lawyers who work on national security issues generally avoid putting in writing any analysis that could constrain policymakers. The State Department declined to discuss its decision-making process, but said in a statement that it had put in place a strategy to lessen civilian casualties, that's nice, before the last major arms sale to the Saudi-led coalition in May of 2019. It added, how's it working, by the way? It added that the department had continued to work tirelessly on reducing civilian harm in Yemen and elsewhere, citing redesigned policies, expanded analyses, and new training for partners, which the Saudis and Emiratis were, quote, eagerly accepting. The Obama-era decision not to elevate the troubling legal analysis was made as the administration was already taking a tougher line on civilian deaths in Yemen. In December of 2016, President Barack Obama blocked the shipment of precision-guided bombs that he had agreed to sell the Saudis. But other military aid continued, and by setting the legal opinion aside, the outgoing officials, regardless of whether they were aware of the potential consequences, ensured that it did not have sufficient weight when Mr. Trump took office. So that's not going to help. Within months, Trump delivered the bombs that Obama had halted, because he halted them, not because it was a good idea. Then his administration sought to advance still more sales, $8.1 billion in weapons and equipment, in 22 batches, including $3.8 billion in precision-guided bombs and bomb parts made by Raytheon Company to Saudi Arabia and UAE. Lawmakers blocked shipments for nearly 2 years until Secretary of State Mike Pompeo instructed his subordinates to circumvent Congress, because you can do that. Not really. They did so by declaring an emergency over Iran, which prompted the Inspector General review. That investigation not only documented the long-standing legal worries, but also created a critical report that could itself increase the legal risks, scholars said. The findings could be used as evidence in the future against U.S. officials or the U.S. government, said Ryan Goodman, a New York University law professor who was a Defense Department lawyer in the Obama administration. With the civilian death toll rising in Yemen, the American role in the war has become a significant political issue. Joe Biden, who you know what he's up to these days, let's see, he was also, of course, VP when the conflict began, says he would end U.S. support for the war. By contrast, Trump is doubling down on arms sales and boasting of revenue from the Saudis. I have a very good relationship with them, Mr. Trump said during an interview in February. They buy billions and billions and billions of dollars of product from us. They buy tens of billions of dollars of military equipment. All true. Now, another section here, the specter of war crimes. Under Mr. Obama, top State Department officials could have confronted questions of American complicity in crimes carried out by the Saudi-led coalition in Yemen. Instead, they set the matter aside. Not good. In March of 2015, when the Saudi-led coalition first moved to dislodge Houthi rebels who had captured Sana'a, the Yemeni capital, Mr. Obama agreed to support the effort. His administration signed off on the sale of $1.3 billion in precision-guided bombs and bomb parts to replenish Saudi stockpiles depleted due to the high operational tempo in Yemen. But it quickly became clear that the Saudis and their partners at the time, including the Emiratis, were either using the bombs negligently or deliberately aiming them at civilians. I mean, remember, they are precision-guided bombs. As dumb as it sounds when you say it this way, I'm guessing that the Obama administration figured that giving them precision-guided bombs would actually help reduce civilian casualties. But guess what? Well, I think there is a third possibility. Besides the possibility that they're using them negligently and accidentally killing civilians, or that they're deliberately aiming at civilians, there's also the possibility they don't really work all that well, or they work fine, but bombs explode, and sometimes when civilians are around, they're going to get killed. So you can be precise about where you drop it, but if it's in the middle of a city, you're really, they're not magical. In the first 18 months of fighting, human rights groups linked American bombs to attacks on homes, apartment buildings, factories, warehouses, a cultural center, an agricultural complex, a primary school, and other non-military sites. And I'm sure the prosecutors of the war in Saudi Arabia and the UAE would say, well, we're fighting this stealthy enemy that uses these sites as cover. And they probably do. But then that's just a very difficult war to fight. And either you shouldn't be fighting it or you should be fighting it house to house on the ground, but you're afraid of the cost of doing that. So instead, you just bomb everything, but with precision. As concerns over such strikes were intensifying in Washington, a State Department lawyer examined whether American officials who approved arms sales to the Saudis and their partners faced legal risks. And it's interesting. I mean, in the Obama administration, they would do a genuine analysis of this, and it wouldn't surprise you that they would come up with a finding that, yeah, I suppose a finding of liability for war crimes could stand. I don't know whether you'd get a conviction on it, but it makes some sense. They can't do these things without our selling them the bombs, and now they're doing them once we sell them the bombs. When we don't sell them the bombs, it stops. When we do sell them the bombs, it starts. That feels like proximate cause. We can probably get something here in the ICC. Whereas the Trump administration probably wouldn't entertain that as an idea to begin with. They're just far too simplistic and will do anything to cut off liability for themselves. We're not the ones dropping the bombs. We just make them. Don't look at us. That's a kind of a classic, a tort reform, a quote unquote tort reform view of a Republican tort reform view of liability here. We just make the things. We don't know. We didn't tell you who to kill with them. Or even, maybe you just wanted to collect them. We didn't know you wanted to kill people with them. Drawing on the International Tribunal case against Charles Taylor, the Liberian warlord that the United States has cited in Al-Qaeda prosecutions, the lawyer reached an alarming conclusion in a 2016 memo. American officials, including the Secretary of State, could be charged with war crimes for their role in arming the Saudi coalition, according to 6 current and former government officials with knowledge of the legal memo. Interesting. In other words, we wanted to be able to extend liability through Taylor to reach, I guess, or I don't know whether it's through Taylor, but drawing on the International Tribunal case against Taylor that the United States cited in Al-Qaeda prosecutions. Anyway, when we wanted to use this sort of liability theory against Al-Qaeda, sure, we believe in it. When it's applied against us, no, we never heard of such a thing. That's impossible. All right, back to the story. In that year, scholars discussed a law journal paper laying out a war crimes argument for that type of conflict written by Brian Finucane, I'm guessing at that pronunciation, a State Department lawyer assigned to the agency's Bureau of Political Military Affairs. Speaking in a private capacity at Yale Law School conference, a conference in 2018 on the Yemen war, Mr. Finucane said officials who could be prosecuted were, quote, those who have decision-making authority or veto authority. He added, I think you're looking at potentially very senior individuals. But top State Department lawyers never sent the internal memo to the Secretary of State's office. Brian Egan, the department's legal advisor at the time, did not respond to requests for comment. Reuters reported on aspects of the legal concerns in 2016, it is noted here. Though the legal analysis did not advance within the State Department, the Obama administration opened a policy review, and Secretary of State John Kerry tried to broker a ceasefire. Since 2018, Representative Ted Lieu, Democrat of California, has asked the State Department to release the memo, but it has refused to do so. Next up, scrambling for a legal shield. Over the spring of 2017, Mr. Trump's aides and some State Department officials worked to unfreeze the bomb delivery that Mr. Obama had halted. But officials in the department's Political Military Affairs Bureau, which shepherds arms exports, wanted assurances that they could do the president's bidding without putting themselves in legal jeopardy. Well, you can't. During a White House meeting before Mr. Trump's visit to Saudi Arabia that May, remember that was his first state visit, I think, right? Is that one we're talking about? One official, I guess he's made more than one. One official, Mike Miller, Then the director of that bureau's Office of Regional Security and Arms Transfers put the concerns bluntly, according to two officials. He said he was worried he could be found liable for aiding the killing of civilians. A brief exchange at the Pentagon that March had offered a potential breakthrough, pressed by Defense Secretary Jim Mattis. Remember, now he's supposed to be a good guy? To stop bombing the women and children, and that sounds like a good idea. The visiting Saudi Deputy Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman, had agreed to take steps to curb the killing of Yemeni civilians, according to participants. But then he killed American, not citizens, but permanent residents instead. U.S. officials then drafted a set of guidelines for the Saudi and American governments to follow as a condition of future arms sales. They envisioned the plan not only saving civilian lives, but also offering protection against claims of American complicity in war crimes, which would be nice. We worked pretty rigorously to try and give them a sense that this was now going to be a harder sell. Tina S. Kadanow, who headed the Political Military Affairs Bureau at the time, said of the Saudis. And I can't fault them entirely. Like if what it takes to get you to stop committing as many, war crimes, is threatening you with liability such that you have to restructure deals so that they are, one, providing protection from you from war crimes liability, but as a byproduct, hopefully reducing the number of attacks and the scope and depth of attacks that kill civilians, that's not a terrible thing. One would hope that your conscience would help you avoid launching those attacks. But if legal liability threats help reduce the number of such attacks, I guess I'll take it if you're not going to do it on your own. But over 3 months, officials eager to push through the weapons deals pared back the guidelines. Surprise. Stuart E. Jones, then the acting assistant secretary in the Bureau of Near Eastern Affairs, led subordinates to quickly settle on conditions, officials said. Jared Kushner, Trump's advisor and son-in-law, was helping to restart arms sales and wanted the president to announce them during the May 2017 trip to Riyadh. Emails obtained by the Times show that Mr. Jones and his colleagues discussed how to craft acceptable language about the use of precision-guided munitions that Adel al-Jubeir, the Saudi foreign minister, would sign before Mr. Trump's trip. In April of 2017, Timothy A. Lenderking, a deputy assistant secretary in the Bureau, wrote to Mr. Jones that he had met with the State Department lawyers and agreed on edits to cut back the language of the letter. The next day, Mr. Jones wrote that Mr. Al-Jubeir had quickly agreed to sign a letter to Rex Tillerson, he's long gone, then the Secretary of State, and had asked for language. Mr. Jones, who left the State Department in 2018, referred questions about this back to the department. The letter listed about 5 assurances, including a promise by the Saudis to have their forces take part in a $750 million training program run by the U.S. military. So we do get money. They just don't get weapons for that money. Let's see if they take that apart. In Riyadh, Trump and King Salman announced the arms deal, and then they danced, and Trump waved a sword around and bowed and scraped and kissed their butts. Remember that? Next section, and I think it's the last one, a horror show. After Mr. Trump abruptly fired Mr. Tillerson in March of 2018, and as Pompeo awaited Senate confirmation to lead the State Department, John J. Sullivan, the deputy secretary, served as the agency's acting head. The officials worried about the arms sales believed Mr. Sullivan to be attentive to the humanitarian concerns of the Yemen war. In the roughly 3 weeks he was running the department, they sent an appeal for legal clarity. Mr. Sullivan responded by approving a memo the officials had drafted that recommended carrying out a robust strategy to reduce civilian casualties and an updated legal analysis before the bomb sales moved forward, according to U.S. officials. Mr. Pompeo took over soon after that. That August, a coalition jet dropped an American-made bomb on a Yemeni school bus, killing 54 people, including 44 children, in an attack that Mr. Trump would later call a horror show. The next month, Pompeo issued a formal certification to Congress that the Saudi-led coalition was working to minimize civilian deaths, despite news reports and internal State Department assessments to the contrary. Senior department officials had warned Mr. Pompeo against the certification, in part because they had grown more anxious over the legal issues. officials said. The move provoked a backlash in Congress and strengthened lawmakers' resolve to continue blocking arms sales. By April 2019, senior State Department political appointees were discussing a rarely invoked tactic to force through $8.1 billion in weapons sales without congressional approval, declaring an emergency over Iran. At the center of those discussions was Marique String, a young former Senate aide who had joined the State Department in 2017. By January 2019, he had become the acting head of the Political Military Affairs Bureau and closely oversaw the emergency planning. I don't think I'm going to be able to get to the rest of this before the break, and of course we're going to switch over to talking to Joan after this, but an important start. We'll be right back. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, and I've learned that I either need to update these announcements more often or stop saying that the announcements are brand new. What's not new is that this message, too, is a call for your support in keeping the Kagro in the Morning show on the air. My thanks go out to all of you who do support the show through your donations. The stats say that Kagro in the Morning fans download our program about 2,000 times each weekday, but our donors make up only about 8% of our daily listeners. Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple to make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. If we're helping keep you sane during the Trump era, consider what that's worth. $1 a day? 50 cents? One thin dime? We do about 20 shows a month, so pick a number, do the math, and head to patreon.com/KagroX to let us know. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. As promised, we've been joined by Joan McCarter. I'll of course include the New York Times piece here. The rest of this is a description of some bureaucratic back and forth, as really the whole story is, quite honestly. But it's interesting to see the internal mechanisms at work here. Anyway, suffice to say, this is a continuing story, a continuing situation that has implications across the policy spectrum, but something we don't often spend enough time on discussing just how bad the damage to our international reputation has been and will continue to be under the Trump administration. We got enough problems here domestically that we don't often have to touch on that, but consider it problematic that the United States initially began blocking the access of ICC prosecutors and investigators to the United States for their investigation into what we had been up to in Afghanistan. And while blocking them over Afghanistan, we found ourselves falling into liability for human rights violations and war crimes in Yemen as well. So, and I guess couple that with the fact that now there'll be some additional interest in, say, what's going on with mass hysterectomies at ICE detention facilities. That sounds a little bit Hitler-y, and we'd like to look into that. So, not really exactly covering ourselves in glory, as we known to be the case for quite some time. Now, there are a number of other issues, and I've been saving a number of them specifically for the possibility of discussion with Joan, because I gather that they are on her plate, although there's so much else already there. I'll let you guide us in terms of what's on top of your agenda for the day. Joan, how are you? Good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm agitated and worried about our future, but beyond that, doing okay.
It's a really strange time.
Yeah.
Yes. But at least we're all in this national nightmare together.
Yes, like the other one that we saw on television, that we were all in it together until the ads changed and everybody was supposed to go back to Applebee's.
Is that where we're supposed to be?
It's one place you could go. I think cheese sticks are an important part of, a complete recovery, I guess. Sure.
What did you want to talk about? Let's have it be your agenda today.
Okay. Well, I'm sure we both, I think, separately at home, groaned aloud as soon as we saw this story. Although I'm not certain how solid the story is at this point, but it was the story that I guess Dianne Feinstein, who would be in line to chair the Judiciary Committee. Hasn't she already done that? I don't know. Maybe not. This was the Intelligence Committee that she was chaired.
Yeah.
It would be in line to chair the Judiciary Committee, possibly, if the Democrats were to win control of the Senate. I don't know whether she was asked or whatever, but it was put to her. So, what would be on your agenda? How would you handle, say, judicial appointments under a Biden administration if there was a Democratic majority in the Senate? And specifically, would you, like Pat Leahy, inexplicably insist on restoring the old blue slip procedure that would then allow Republicans to indefinitely block across the board, in many cases, Biden's judicial nominees, even as the rules have already been changed such that there's no filibustering judicial appointments anymore. And one of the chief agenda items you would think of a new Biden administration would be to pay strict attention to certainly filling any vacancies that still existed, and maybe even expanding the courts so that more vacancies came into existence to try to rebalance the federal courts. And I guess she not only said, yeah, I might reinstate the blue slip system, which is just a groaner and a head slapper, because we already watched what happened when Pat Leahy made that mistake. Mm-hmm. And we're paying for it right now. The vacancies that Trump is filling with 15-year-old kids or whatever, from Covington Catholic, apparently. He's getting them all. I don't know. But he's filling with these, inexperienced, not qualified, as rated by the ABA, super extreme right-wing judges. They're being appointed to vacancies in many cases that existed and stayed open during the Obama administration, even when the rules had changed, because the Democratic leadership of the Judiciary Committee was allowing Republicans to block even hearings for those nominations if they were from, if they were citizens in
Republican states.
Citizens of the home states of these senators. I think we all remember the blue slip thing, and we remember your description of that as a huge tactical error on Leahy's part. And now Feinstein apparently says, yeah, I'd do that again.
Feinstein apparently doesn't realize that it was a problem.
Yeah, that's the other bizarre
She doesn't remember, I guess. I don't want to be ageist about this, but is she having memory issues?
You would... I cannot find another explanation. Well, the only other explanation is, I don't want to acknowledge that I knew it was a problem because this is what I want to do about blue slips. But, yeah.
She actually said something to the effect of nobody brought it up as an issue then.
Yeah. For 26 years, her full term of service, I guess, in the Senate. She says, no one in my 26 years has ever said there's a problem with blue slips. If there's been a problem, I'd love to see it. Somebody show me what the problem is. Her own website, her Senate website, in the press releases is filled with her complaints about the blue slip system over the decades that she's been in the Senate. Every time the Republicans change the rules, she complains bitterly, and she's right. The idea that I don't understand how it's been a problem. I don't understand how you've been complaining about it and it's not been a problem at the same time. I don't get it. She's been outspoken on these things for a long time. Not that she was going to do anything about it, but she was complaining. I'd love to see it. All right, turn around. There it is.
I have no explanation.
I tried to come up with one. I couldn't.
Is she saying what she thinks moderates want to hear? I don't know.
But
I don't know.
Why, if so?
Is she telling the traditional media, no, I'm not a crazy liberal, don't worry? Is she trying to reassure Republican colleagues? Is she trying to reassure scared Democrats? Is she just out of it? I
don't know. Yeah, it's really hard to tell. If she's trying to reassure Republican colleagues, they're laughing their asses off. They can't believe their good luck. I mean, every threat that Democrats make to change the rules or procedures, Republicans always say, regardless of what it is, and rightly, they say, well, if you do this, we're going to make you pay for it. We're going to do worse to you. And
they always do.
Yeah, and they're right, and they're correct, and it's an honest prediction, and we appreciate that. What's amazing is Democrats, every time the shoe is on the other, and maybe you think, oh, well, that's nice, it's high-minded. We take the high road. When they go low, we go high, but this is something different. They say, not only if you guys do this to us, if Republicans change the rules on Democrats, well, we'll show you, we'll change it back so that you can abuse them when we're in power. And Republicans say, whoa, please don't do that. Oh, no. I hope you don't give me the opportunity to unilaterally block some or all of Joe Biden's judicial appointments. That would be terrible. I don't think they appreciate they don't even appreciate the kindness either, because it's not like it dissuades them from undoing it again later. Not only has Leahy made this mistake before, but we've actually, this is the second time we've been through this with Republicans with the blue slips. The Republicans have, really under Orrin Hatch, said, to hell with blue slips, screw you Democrats, we're not going to let you block anybody. And then Leahy reinstated them. And I guess the hope was, well, the next Republican chair of the Judiciary Committee won't be so mean. And then it was Grassley, and he said, oh, by the way, as though it were an original idea, to hell with blue slips, screw you Democrats. Damn, that ploy for bipartisanship just didn't do what I thought.
Can you imagine?
I don't know what to do except try again with somebody else. So I don't know what she's up to. I hate to
borrow trouble from 2021, but yeah, this is going to have to be dealt with. And
it may be.
They're seriously talking about, and I'm so thrilled with this, getting rid of the filibuster. I don't know if you saw the story over the weekend. Harry Reid has set up a war room.
Yes.
And it's looking like this is a serious possibility.
Right.
Democrats now are preparing for the idea that they're going to have to get rid of the filibuster, and they're working out now how they're going to do it, how they're going to convince the standout Democrats, and how they're going to sell it to the American people. Which, the American people are going to yawn. But
that's okay.
Aside from us, who understand.
Yes. Right, I discovered we're having trouble with the mail after all. My invitation to participate has been lost.
Oh,
apparently.
Goodness.
I can't believe they're putting together. I read the article that said that specifically that they were looking to have people who could help them with the digital online outreach strategy behind this. And I said, I can't think of anybody who could possibly help with that. So you're on your own, guys. I guess, I don't know. So that was kind of interesting, especially since a lot of the names that were included in the list are people that I taught this to. But okay. Enough with that.
Reach out.
Right, yeah.
Reach out, Kagro.
Somebody
Get
will
on that
probably
list. Get your invitation.
I guess so. Well, DeJoy won't give it to me. So try email everybody.
Maybe Feinstein's reacting to that. I have no idea what she's doing.
Yeah, I can't
Other
explain
than causing us headaches that we don't need right now because we have enough other stuff going on.
Yeah. I tried to imagine something. Maybe she was trying to say, well, there's nothing inherently bad about blue slips in that a home state senator should have some say. But even that doesn't work out because she's seen them abused, and her own press releases say
there is rationale for it. You do want home state senators who are acting in good faith to be able to say,
that's it.
Yes, I am aware of this person. Their reputation is either good or bad. I've seen their work. I know them. I understand what they can bring to the judiciary. Yes, go ahead with it. Or no, this person's really a problem and shouldn't be there.
Yeah.
No, don't. In the normal world, in the part of the 20th century of America, that worked.
Yeah.
Because people were operating in good faith.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, and now they're not, and she doesn't know that, and I can't really believe that that's the case. It's just a dumb statement. I guess she was trying to escape.
Of all of the people who have embraced the clubbiness of the Senate, the decorum of the Senate, the fraternity of the Senate, Leahy and Feinstein are way, way up there.
Yeah.
The institutionalists.
I remember that. That's an interesting term. Oh, Mitch McConnell's one of them, I think.
Oh, right.
Yeah, don't forget. So they're part of that club as well. So I don't know. And it may all work out differently in the end. This may be what she said to try to escape reporters, and it might be very much the case that when push comes to shove, should Democrats take back control of the Senate and discussions begin about who's going to chair what committees, that they may find, that actually is going to change. And the chair that the Senate Policy Committee chooses for the Judiciary Committee will abide by that policy. Now, if you don't want to do that, we can find something else for you to do, Diane. And she may then say, I was just, that was just me talking way back when. But situations change. I understand what you're talking about. And now that the team has a different plan going forward, I can abide by that. Or she says, no, this actually has to happen. And at which point they say, the policy committee recommends a different chair. That's all. So there are people to lean on for this.
There are people to lean on, and we will be doing that.
We'll let you know. Okay.
We'll try to be doing that. I don't know. Who knows what else is going to happen in the next few months.
Oh, right. Yeah, that's true. So many other things can happen.
Yeah. I don't know why it hadn't occurred to me before, because usually I'm pretty good at doomsday scenarios in my head. In addition to trying to figure out a continuing resolution to keep government open for who knows how long, and COVID relief, and an election.
Oh, that too.
What Democrats in the House are having to think about now is what happens when Trump says, no, that election doesn't count, I'm staying. And how does that affect a government shutdown? So are they going to have to come up with a continuing resolution to prevent the government from shutting down that goes until after the inauguration? Are they going to have to push it into February?
Wow. Yeah, or can they do it by, I guess they'd have to explore.
Because it would be a tool Trump would use to stay in office.
Yeah. I can't leave now. Government shutdown. Wow. Oh, no.
Yeah.
That seems sort of perfect stormish.
Doesn't it seem sort of perfect stormish?
Yeah.
I mean, every December is, with Mitch McConnell in charge, and just the way things have happened now. But so
that's a new one. Yeah, I don't know. I've never seen anybody have to try to think about writing a continuing resolution that doesn't name a date certain, and I'm not even sure that January 20th is our date certain anymore, because who knows what the
apparently February has been floated.
Wow. I mean, that's the best guess, but I mean, I'm trying to think, is there a way you can write it and say, look, this is for continuing operations until, what do you even say? The legitimate next president is inaugurated? Or, I mean, there's no way you can write it without it being like Trump specific, and that won't hold up.
No.
Yeah, I mean, you just got to target
it has
February.
to be a date certain. Do they pick a date certain of? They always pick just before Congress is going on recess. Do they say, okay, President's Day?
I guess so. I guess they'll have to push it. Yeah.
And they have to decide this by the end of this month, because of course that's when funding runs out.
Yeah, and it's only 15 days.
It is only 15 days.
That's calendar days. They're asleep for half of that.
Right. There's 8 days of actual work, maybe.
Okay. I've seen 8-day miracles before. What the hell? This could work. Happy Hanukkah, everybody. We just fixed it. All right. Well, it's a little early in a year.
So, yeah, and add into all of that, is there going to be any more coronavirus relief?
Oh, is that changing? Are we getting anywhere? I thought I saw somebody float something, but
The problem solvers,
oh, good.
they're still at it. They have floated a plan,
Well, that's it
which
then.
um, elements of it are not awful. I mean, one of the things that they're talking about, and leadership, particularly Pelosi, seems to be fighting it. And maybe she has a secret reason to be doing so. They've talked about offering up bites of the HEROES Act, voting on it as standalone bills, saying, okay, here is the money for the post office. They've already done that. Using that example, saying, okay, here is the money for another round of stimulus checks. Here is the expanded unemployment insurance. Here's the money for testing. Here's the money for state and local governments so that schools can safely reopen. They're talking about chopping it up and doing it as standalone bills, which I don't think is a bad idea. I think that having the House act regularly with stuff that is needed and is popular could put more pressure on McConnell.
Yeah. Okay.
But for whatever reason, Pelosi does not want to do it that way. She apparently has been talking to Mnuchin and to McConnell about the shutdown issue, about the continuing resolution. Maybe she sees some path for a broader, larger deal. But I have a hard time believing that.
Yeah. I mean, it's standard practice, what she's aiming for, I think. Just getting it all done at once.
It makes much more sense to do it all at once. It makes much more sense to have the big bill. McConnell has shown he absolutely does not want to do that. He voted on his skinny package, which he knew would fail because Democrats could not agree to it.
Right.
He put it up as just a political game to say, well, yeah, the Senate acted. Look, here, people, you can point to this vote that you took when people say, where's my money? And say, well, we tried. And as near as I can tell, that's all McConnell wanted to do. He doesn't care if another relief bill passes. He doesn't feel responsible for the people of America surviving this.
I guess not.
He's done his part.
Well, man. All right. I think I see your point. I think I guess certainly if they can't get it all passed at once, and I have a hard time believing that they could, based on what you were telling us, that it's certainly not a bad fallback plan to say, well, we'll do it by bits and pieces and put the House on the record.
One of the problems is having the House having been out since basically May. And when they came back and did the post office bill, it's like, oh, okay, you can come back and do stuff. Why haven't you? Why did you let this stop in May and haven't been pushing since then? And maybe I'm alone in seeing that as a sort of a problem, but
no, I doubt it. But
I think no, the House isn't in jeopardy. Yes, we're going to regain the House in this election, barring, I don't know. I don't see any scenario in which Democrats don't hold the House.
Yeah, with real votes.
So there's not that kind of pressure there, but there is the pressure of, well, we've got to get the Senate. And also, there are a lot of people out there on the verge of total economic disaster, and maybe you should be doing everything in your power to try to fix that, including having votes every goddamn day in the House to show that the Senate is not doing its job.
Yeah, no, it makes for perfect sense to me. I understand the desire to get it all at once, and I think it puts certain parts of it possibly in jeopardy. But although, to me, I think not only would the House be on the record trying to do something daily, as you point out, but it means there will be Republicans who are running for re-election who will have to specifically cast no votes on every element of the thing and not have the cover of saying, well, I don't like the way this is done, but I love that.
Right.
So, fine.
Put everybody on record.
Yeah, I mean, you are running for re-election, right? The House guys, I know you're going to win and everything. That's the prediction anyway. But why not win overwhelmingly or most convincingly or also help win the Senate?
And why not tell the American people that at least somebody in power gives a damn?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, with only 8 days left, who knows how many of those they could get prepared and onto the floor, and maybe Pelosi thinks the only shot at getting it all taken care of is doing it all at once. Or, I don't know what else. There could be any number of reasons, but she does tend to know what she's doing on these things.
She does tend to know what she's doing, but I'm not.
We have
I don't
concerns.
know.
That's all right. Fair enough. People express concerns to her all the time, and then she takes them into account and generally does well with things. So.
She has said that they'll come back in October if they have to come back in October.
Okay.
And maybe that's what she's using as leverage, saying, all right.
Yeah, you lose
Mitch
your last
McConnell,
campaign
do
time.
you want to not come back in October when we're just 3 weeks away from the election and pass a big relief package that will help millions and millions of people? Maybe she's bluffing that way. I don't know.
Yeah, all right. Well, I guess all will become clear shortly. You only have 8 days of working days anyway. 2 weeks to find out whether the government shuts down and whether that, what kind of headlines that generates. I'm sure we'll have plenty of, wow, I can't believe Democrats want to run for office based on a shutdown, as though, they controlled the whole government, which they don't. We'd like to, but, 2/3 of this is Republicans. I suppose a shutdown would be bad for. You might write that article, but it's rare. Yeah, I don't know. So okay, well, we're really up against it here, and just
we're really up
no
against
discussion.
It, and we get the usual. Both sides.
Right.
I have no idea what's going to happen, and I really resent the fact that September, which used to be my very favorite month of all, has been totally ruined.
Well, yeah, it's got problems.
Every September is now. It's the same with Christmas.
Yeah, because we just kicked the can until Christmas in September.
Although this time it'll be Valentine's Day, maybe.
Okay, well, perhaps we'll see, but only because we might not have a peaceful transition of power. But besides
Isn't that
that,
a fun
thought? Yeah, right. And we didn't even get to that story today. That I guess the lunatic over at HHS, is it Michael Caputo?
Caputo.
Yeah, who I guess flipped out, and what was it? I don't know exactly what happened, but a private video saying not only about his own paranoid fantasies about threats on his life from, I don't know, alien visitors or whatever. But, maybe we won't have a peaceful transition of power, and there's going to be a shooting war at the inauguration, and everybody should buy ammo, blah, 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 and stock up on it now. And then apparently it ends with the deletion of his Twitter account. And, I don't know, I assume he's hiding in a bunker. The administration has no plans to get rid of him, but he's...
Yeah, he's still getting a
clearly
taxpayer-funded paycheck.
Yeah, which, hopefully he can put towards some, mental health assistance.
Yes, that would be helpful.
And he says as much. That's kind of what he needs. And I'm in agreement with him on that.
Yes.
So that's pretty weird. And all right, I guess we're kind of up against our own timeline here. We forgot to reopen the government during our time together.
If it helps to know, House Democrats are talking about how they handled this non-peaceful transition of government.
That's
so,
good.
They're aware.
Yeah, okay. Well, that is important because, for a long time, that would be something I understood as politicians why they wanted to avoid discussion of it. But now I'm glad they're taking it seriously, and I'm glad that there's evidence
privately,
of it.
They're aware that this is something that could happen and are making contingency plans. So that's important to know.
I think so. So that's reassuring. That's good news. When we speak again, there'll be, I guess, actually 8 calendar days left, which would probably mean about 3 working days. And if we don't have a better idea of whether the government is going to stay open next week, then we're really in trouble. I guess put that on your calendar. And 2 weeks from there, then we'll know for sure.
It always gives us something to talk about, at least.
That's true. There is always that. And
There's never a lack of news, Kagro.
Yeah. You know, you're the only one that I hear talking about it, too. I scour the news pretty well. I'm sure somebody else is writing about it somewhere, but no one gives it a more thorough treatment and keeps an eye on it better than you do. So I appreciate it, and I think everyone listening does, too.
I hope so.
I hope so. All right. Well, we'll check in again next week and tell you once again that we still have no idea. And the week after that, we'll say, all right, it closed. And we know that for sure. So we have a plan. Good. I'm glad we have at least that much.
We have a plan. Our next 3 weeks are taken care of.
Excellent. Thanks, Joan. Hope things calm down with the weather there.
Week.
And, stay out of trouble, you know. Thanks again.
I'll do my best.
Talk to you again. Okay. All right, everybody. Wrapping up here. It's time now to hand things over to Justice Putnam for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. And his part of the West Coast is still cooking out there. So we'll check in with him and find out what's up in the news and in the weather.
From Daily Co's Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show.
With David Waldman.
I'll tell you what, we'll take an educated guess at what he might cover next by saying that a federal judge has issued an arrest warrant for a neo-Nazi podcaster, it's not me, for being in total disregard of court orders associated with the deadly 2017 Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, Virginia. How could he be in total disregard for the law? Come on.